Hi, I'm Elizabeth, and I'm not buying books this year. These are my early February 2019 romance reviews. So far this month, I think I've done pretty well. I have read 8 books, most of which I had already purchased. So these are not library books, they are not KU, they are not Audible Romance Package. If you're new to my channel, I am not buying books this year, and I am reading off of my TBR almost exclusively. Last month in January, I read a lot of Kindle Unlimited books because that was going to be my last month of Kindle Unlimited. I have since canceled it and no longer have access to the service. I also canceled the Audible Romance Package. So I still have Audible, so I'm still getting 1 credit a month. And based on the rules of my no-buy, I am able to take out certain books from the library. In addition to, if I have a gift card, I can also buy certain books. But that would be very few, and I don't currently have any gift cards. So right now I am entirely depending on my TBR and a little bit on the library. But out of these 8 books, 7 of them are from my TBR. Yay! So let's go ahead and get into the books. The first one is The Lamplighter's Love by Delphine Dryden. This is an ebook. It is currently still free, and I think when I bought it in December of 2014, it was probably also free. I read this for the Romanceopoly London, whatever it is, the steampunk square. And I have read Del Dryden's steampunk books in the past. I read the first one in her steampunk series. I don't think this is actually technically a part of the steampunk series. This has more of an erotic bent than those do. Although she does tend to write fairly sexy books, most of her contemporaries are erotic BDSM type books, but this one, of course, is sort of historically set. And as I said, it's called The Lamplighter's Love, and the hero has the title of a person known as the Lamplighter. What this means is that London, where the book is set, is basically run on a very complex system of clockworks. And the hero is, of course, the lamplighter, and the heroine is his apprentice and has been for some time. I would say that steampunk tends to fall into one of 2 categories. Either you get kind of science-y steampunk, or you get kind of magic-y steampunk. This is definitely on the science-y side. It's not like you're out there reading, physics equations or something. It's not that technical, but it is definitely based on sort of a more mechanical approach to steampunk than, say, like a magic approach to steampunk. It is also extremely sexy. It also sort of delves into questions of feminism, for sure. And then, and more specifically, sort of being a woman at work and the sorts of things that women run into at work that perhaps men don't run into as much. And I would say also a little bit about class. I think it was just an extremely interesting read for a very short book. It's a novella or possibly even a short story. I don't know exactly how many words it is, but it's quite short. Excuse me. A drink of water. Anyway, as I said, I really enjoyed this book. I found the happy ending very persuasive for such a short book. And I actually found just the ending in general persuasive and uplifting in a way, but unexpected, in an unexpected way. So if you are looking for something to fill that particular Romanceopoly square, this is short, it is free. It would be a very low risk steampunk book if you are not already a steampunk fan and you're not sure what you're getting yourself into. The next book I read was The Devil in Disguise by Cynthia Eden. This is also free. This one is free though because it's the first in a series. I have 7 or 8 or 9 or something books. I purchased this one in December of since it's free, December of 2018. So it was one of the last books I bought before the end of last year. This book is paranormal. It's about the devil, the actual literal devil, and basically a siren who's kind of on the run from a bad relationship, essentially, but also a bad and complicated relationship. I loved everything about this. It's one of the books that has made me sort of gnash my teeth when it comes to my no-buy year, because I really loved it. Cynthia Eden was a new to me author. I liked the world building. I liked the moral ambiguity of it. I think if you're a fan of the Lucifer television show, you will really, really enjoy this. Not to say that I think it reads like fanfic. They're two actually very different characters. The devil in this one is not as much of an asshole, honestly, as Lucifer is in the TV show. But I did think it kind of functioned in a lot of the same way in terms of the overarching themes of sort of good and evil, and I just thought it was a very interesting book. The third book is also free. Are we sensing a theme here? This is Wilder's Mate by Moira Rogers, and I picked this one up, picked this one out of my TBR for the Fated Mates challenge for Romanceopoly. This is not one of my favorite tropes. I think I mentioned that in my intro video, the February TBR video. I'll link that somewhere. But it is free. I downloaded it in May of 2015. It is another paranormal. I would say it's kind of actually a paranormal steampunk. It's set in the Old West, kind of based on a vampires versus werewolves type scenario. The hero is a werewolf. The heroine is kind of an inventor, and that's kind of where the steampunkiness of it comes in. I think the tech that she's using, the mechanical tech that she's using, is probably exceeds the level of what you would expect to see in an Old West setting. But the vampire versus werewolf thing kind of makes it more paranormal-ish. And the thing that I really loved about this one was the way that it handled the typical fated mates, mating compulsion type thing. The hero, being a werewolf, has a period of time in the month where he is particularly horny. I don't know how else to put that. And the heroine, the way she approaches that, in such an enthusiastic and willing way, to help him through that period of the month, gave this book kind of a sexy healing, and I'm putting air quotes around this because the sexy healing vibe that it has, I would call this actually like a trope, honestly. I don't know that it's necessarily one that you're going to see as often as, say, like Enemies to Lovers or whatever, but it definitely, anytime there's a character offering some manner of healing or relief via the sexual arena, I'm just all about that. I don't know why, but I love it every time it comes up. The next book I read was A Princess in Theory by Alyssa Cole. I actually got this one in audio from the library, but I do own the ebook. I bought the ebook in February of 2018. It is a contemporary. The ebook is currently $5.99, so if for some reason your library doesn't have it, I think it's probably well worth the price. At least it was for me. This book is about a struggling grad student heroine and a hero who is an actual prince of a small African country. The heroine, I think, is an epidemiology grad student or public health, and she has to do with the spread of disease. And she's an orphan. She's really struggling. She's had really quite a difficult life. She has a difficult time trusting people, and the hero makes some enormous mistakes, although very typical mistakes for a royal type romance. And to an extent, you understand how he gets himself into this situation. I would say this is going to please people who like royal romance a lot, and still probably not annoy people who don't typically like royal romance, which is me. I typically have issues with royalty and romance for various different reasons that I won't go into detail about here. But I loved this book. I actually just got A Duke by Default, which is the second book from the library. Again, in audio, I really like the narrator. So I'm looking forward to probably listening to that one in the second half of the month. The next book I have is Out of Control by Suzanne Brockman. This is romantic suspense. It's currently $7.99, although I bought it in ebook in March of 2018. So I'm guessing there was probably a sale, because this is book 4 in the Troubleshooters. I always want to say Troublemakers, but I think that's wrong. I think it's Troubleshooters series. And I own book 1 and book 4 of this series. So I'm guessing probably that what happened is that somebody was either talking about it in relation to a trope that I was interested in, or that it went on sale at some point. The first book, I actually have it in paperback, and I had tried to read it some time ago, and I had a really hard time getting into the book. It felt slow to me, the pacing felt weird, and now having read this book, number 4, the narrative structure of this series is very interesting. It has an enormous cast of characters, and the way that the plot goes, it's not entirely focused on the primary couple. So there are a lot of sort of side romances that develop over the course of several books. And also, there are various narrative arcs, 3 or 4 narrative arcs that don't really dovetail until maybe the last third of the book. So we spent a lot of time away from the primary couple in the first 2/3 of the book. And I wasn't really getting it. And right, even still like around 60%, I was kind of like, I don't hate this, but I'm not really loving it. And I would say by the end, I was loving it. In fact, I was loving it so much that I think next month I will probably go back and read the Unsung Hero, which is the first in the series, and see if it works better for me this time, kind of having a better understanding of how she structures these stories. The next book that I read was this one, The Pirate O'Keefe by Helen R. Myers. This, I think I picked up in a library sale. It's a vintage contemporary. It came out in 1989. So I wouldn't really call this a contemporary because it's, 30, I guess it's 30 years old, right? Oh my gosh. Anyway, there's a doctor heroine and kind of the corporate raider hero, which is why he's sort of referred to as a pirate. He crashes his boat into the coral reef. He's out yachting on his own, and he's the billionaire type. He crashes his boat into a coral reef of this very tiny, we assume Caribbean island. It's warm, the islanders deliver him to the doctor for healing. This book was interesting. There were aspects of it that worked fairly well for me, and then aspects of it where I was just like, I would say the romance is fairly effective. The overarching story plot, island setting, and how the author treated the islanders worked less well for me. They don't have as much agency, really, as I would prefer to see. And I think that we would see now, hopefully, in 2019. I looked up the author's bio. I think she's from the Midwest. I don't think she was a young woman when she wrote this book. So to an extent, it's a product of its time. And yet, I still struggled with it because it felt like every page I was like, oh, I wish that had just been handled just a little bit better. Just a little bit better. Where I wish you hadn't used that secondary character that you've lovingly and well constructed character in quite that way to prove something about the relationship between the two white characters or about one of the white characters. I wouldn't say I would recommend this to a modern reader. If you're interested in the history of the genre, there are worse things to read, but there are also better things to read. Okay, so the next book is Forever's Promise by Farah Rashan. I bought this in ebook. It's $3.99. I bought it in May 2017. It's a small town contemporary, so it filled the Sweet Street square for Romanceopoly for me. It's about the hero is a doctor, and the heroine is the owner of a cafe in this small town that she has recently returned to from being sort of a high-powered marketing executive in Seattle. So she went from being sort of a coffee corporate person to owning her own little cafe. This is part of the Bayou Dreams series. I did read another book in this series previously and really loved it and reviewed it, so I'll link my review on my blog down below. I think probably what happened is that I read that book and then immediately bought the next one in the series. I think that this one is either like 3 or 4, and I had bought 4 or 5. I can't remember the name. Anyway, the order that you read these in is not important. There are recurring characters, but there's no real spoilers for any other elements of any other books in any of the books. I really love Farah Rashan. She's one of the few small town romance authors that I enjoy reading. Of course, this is Kamani, and all of her characters are black. And I really like the way that they interact with the other people in the town, the way they interact with sort of the smallness of their environment. It's cozy and yet it doesn't portray small town life in some sort of idyllic way. This one, I think they talk about sort of the difficulties of rural healthcare, for example, the difficulties of being a small business owner in more of a real way than like, oh no, my cupcakes fell, or so whatever it is. I mean, I'm being kind of snide. I'm sorry if you really love small town contemporary romance, but it's just not one of my favorite genres. And Rashan really makes those work for me. They're also just really good. They're really good books that deal with really real issues in a way that still feels uplifting and hopeful. And I think she's tremendous. The last book I read was Wait For It by M. O'Keefe, or Molly O'Keefe. I read the previous book in this series last month, Burn Down the Night, which I had on my TBR for some period of time. This one is an erotic contemporary, and actually I got the ebook from the library, which is allowed, although the ebook is $4.99 right now. This book sort of starts in the previous book, although she repeats that scene in this book. So if you haven't read that one, you could still read this one. The heroine is separated from the hero's brother. He is abusive. That's not a spoiler. We find that out in the previous book, so you know that going into this one. And they've been separated for about a year. I understand that won't work for everyone. She is technically still married. Some people will probably view that as cheating. I did not. That aspect of it worked very well for me. And really, it's all about sort of I would say the difficulties of her extracting herself from this horrible abusive relationship, but also because the hero is her ex's brother, their family dynamics. And then also sort of what she struggles with. You kind of get a sense of how she got into this relationship and why she got into this abusive relationship, and the toll that it took on her, and then how she's able to kind of grow out of it. And I would say that's the erotic angle of it. She accesses a lot of that power via sex with the hero. And sometimes in ways that are not entirely healthy, and then sometimes in ways that are. And it's interesting to watch them explore their dysfunctional dynamics and then sort of correct them as the book goes on. This was not as intense for me as Burn Down the Night. It is a very intense story, but for whatever reason, I think it was the lack of the overarching romantic suspense sort of subplot involving the previous heroine's sister. This one doesn't really have anything like that. So it felt a lot less intense for me, and I read it straight through, and I absolutely loved it. It's probably one of the best things I've read this year so far. So I read 8 books in the second half of February, sort of 1.5 steampunks, 1.5 paranormals, 1 romantic suspense, and 4 contemporaries, although only one of those was like a straight up contemporary, A Princess in Theory. The others were sort of erotic or small town, or like the Pirate O'Keefe, sort of more of a vintage contemporary, which is hard to really review as like a contemporary. And that is, as I said before, 7 of those 8 books were books that I've owned for some time. The Lamplighter's Love, as I said, I bought in December of 2014. The most recent one I bought was December 2018. So, as is probably going to be typical for most of this year, there are not going to be a lot of new books that I'm going to review. A lot of these are going to be backlist titles. But one of the interesting things that I found as I've talked about these books on social media as I've read them is that there are a lot of people who own these same things, probably because we're all sort of exposed to the same titles that go on sale or the same titles that people talk about and end up free. So I think it's really interesting that my reading some of these books off of my TBR has let other people sort of uncover things in their own collections that they own and just have never read. I think that's about it for today. So have a good week. Doubt not, slay some words, and Lex has your back. Bye.